Good day and welcome to the sixth edition of the SASI Debate Challenge. We are on episode 11, the semi-finals round 2. This is the battleground of intellect brought to you by Say What with support from the Swedish Embassy in Zimbabwe. I am your debate mistress, formerly known as Nicole Natsai Chimanikire, but powerfully known as .co.Nicole. Let the games begin. At this juncture, I would like each participant to say their name as well as their university as they introduce themselves to our audience. Podium 1.
I'm Arthur Twan from CUT.
Proper Fadzo from CAD.
Delitso from Women's University in Africa.
And I'm Fadzai from Women's University in Africa.
Denzel from MSU.
Tando Hutle from MSU.
Brian from LSU.
Rudolinda Mtsengwa from LSU.
Introductions having been done, the motion reads: This House supports the decision to raise the age of sexual consent. I will repeat. This House supports the decision to raise the age of sexual consent. Without much time being wasted, I will call upon the Prime Minister of the opening government to come and make their statement.
Ladies and gentlemen, the age of consent in Zimbabwe has been raised to 18. This means that any engagement of sexual intercourse below the age of 18 is illegal, right? So why are we having this conversation in the context of Zimbabwe, right? We are having this conversation because we have noticed an increase in exposure to harm from our minors, increase in exposure to STIs as well as unplanned pregnancies, right? And as opening government, we feel that this is cause for conversation and debate under two major arguments, which will be, we need the protection of all minors as well as effective comprehensive sexual reproductive health, education, and parental involvement, right? So what does this look like on our side of the house? When we talk about protection of all minors, we feel that the government has a responsibility to take care of all children, right? Which is anyone below the age of 18. And we felt that the original age of consent put 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds under exposure to harm, right? And we felt that is not right? We see 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds who are by definition children, and these are people that are considered vulnerable in our society. They were vulnerable to unplanned pregnancies and exposure to STI. We felt that it compromised their education, right? Because we're talking about people that are sitting for their O-levels, Form 3s and Form 4s, whereas government has the basic responsibility to protect, so does law, right? To protect its children and to protect the vulnerable majority of the nation, right? We also see protection from themselves as we see that these people considered children are irrational, and we don't think we can trust them with the consequences that are involved with sex, right? When we talk about STIs, and we think that even with their mental health, we see a lot of regret from young people because of our conservative society, which is going to come more from my Prime Minister. So what do we mean when we talk about effective comprehensive sexual reproductive health education? We see that in high schools where 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds learn, we don't have this effective sexual reproductive health education. We see a lot of watering down on that end, and we see more comprehensive sex education in colleges where these 18-year-olds are actually in. So we think that in a context where children are allowed to have sex, right, and they're not equipped with the right things that are going to protect them, they don't have the right information, as we have already noted that in an average high school, we don't even see condoms there, they can see one once a year, and we think that that's not fair for us as government to expose our children to these things, especially when we have not equipped them well enough. We also see that the conversation for sex, like charity begins at home, is more better spoken by parents, coming from parents at an age of 18. We feel that these people are now more comfortable having conversations with their children about sex when they're 18, when they're going to college, and we think that that is actually effective in talking about like consequences of sex, in talking about protecting oneself. We see that more amongst 18-year-olds, right? So we personally would create an opposition that wants to talk about sexual exploration at young age and all that. We don't think that this is important as we look at the stakes that are involved in this debate, right? Where we talk about child pregnancies, where we talk about exposure of harm from those pregnancies, where we talk about STIs and fully understanding what it means to be sexually active. We think that we need to prioritize our children in this context of the debate, right? So we also will see further about our psychological well-being as we talk about mental and emotional readiness of the children, which is going to come more from my Prime Minister, and also about how this is going to work hand in hand with the laws that are currently there where we talk about marriage. We don't necessarily think that's something that could lead to pregnancy, and in other cultures, marriage should not be. Thank you.
That was the Prime Minister of the opening government moving swiftly along. I'll ask the leader of opposition from the opening opposition to come and make their case.
Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that raising the age of consent is a superficial remedy to a deeply rooted societal problem, that is sexual harassment and sexual offenses. The opening government highlighted that we need to protect our children from sexual exploitation and harm, and we believe there is a better way to do that without raising the age of consent. The resources we would invest into implementing this policy could take away from sustainable policies, particularly in developing countries where we are already resource constrained. Therefore, we need to be strategic and try to get ahead of potential problems. So, as the opposition bench, we are saying that empowerment, not restriction. Young people need to be empowered to be able to make sound decisions regarding their sexual lives. Raising the age of consent could be seen as a restrictive measure about their freedom and their capacity to think and decide for themselves. What we're basically saying is that we are being condescending to the youth to say you are not smart enough to reach a conclusion through comprehensive sexual education and a dialogue. Additionally, maturity levels vary. While some minors may not be emotionally mature enough to engage in sexual activities, that is not the case for all youths. So now we create an instance whereby teenagers who are consenting to have sex have the potential to be criminalized for their expression of love, but it is a consent, and they think they are mature enough to handle the consequences that come with sex. Secondly, the impact on individuals and relationships. Raising the age of consent has detrimental effects on relationships. Like I mentioned before, two consenting individuals may find themselves being charged for potential sexual offenses, but they consented. But just because they are teenagers who are consenting, it becomes an offense. We also want to talk about the need for education. Rather than raising the age of consent, we think we should increase education and awareness and solidify our comprehensive sexuality education to help young people make informed decisions. We're also talking about the role of parents and declined. The role of parents and guardians. We're saying that parents play a significant role in guiding and supporting their children when it comes to sexual development. Therefore, we should also give parents a say, an opportunity to explore other avenues to, deal with sexual offenses and sexual exploitation. Therefore, we're proposing a framework. We say that let's strengthen laws and policies that protect minors and punish perpetrators for sexual abuse and exploitation. Secondly, we are proposing that let's ensure access to comprehensive sexuality education for young people in all spheres of life, regardless of whether they're in the urban or in the rural side of this country. Thirdly, we're saying let's provide counseling and support services for survivors of sexual abuse and exploitation so that they are better equipped to deal with the diverse issues that surround sexual exploration. We also suggest that we foster collaboration with civil society organizations and communities to prevent sexual exploitation and abuse, increasing awareness and education about the impact of sexual exploitation of any violations or suspected violations. For this reason, this House does not support the rise of the age of consent. Thank you.
That was the leader of opposition making her case. This is the first quarter of our semi-finals, and right about now we'll be taking a short break. Stay tuned and we'll be back with more. Welcome back to the 6th edition of the SASI Debate Challenge. Yes, that is the Speak and Solve initiative brought to you by Say What with support from the Swedish Embassy in Zimbabwe. We are in the second quarter of our debate, and I will be calling the Deputy Prime Minister to come through and make their case.
Panel, we have an opposition that largely depends on sexual reproductive health for the safety of teenagers or minors in this country. But as side government, we clearly stated how sexual reproductive health is not as comprehensive as it is in tertiary colleges in high schools. So we see that this idea of sexual reproductive health managing to actually protect teenagers and minors from the dangers of sexual activity does not hold enough water, as the current model is already failed. What our side opposition does not recognize is 1 in 4 teenagers contract an STD currently in Zimbabwe. So this actually goes against what everything that they're saying depending on sexual reproductive health. We also see how much most parents are opposed to sexual reproductive health being so comprehensive amongst minors, because they believe that they're not ready for that journey and they're not ready to take on the full responsibility of sexual activity. So this is what we stand by as side government, since we see that these children are living in society and they cannot do without their society, so they have to conform to the values of their society as they grow up. Now, we also have an opposition that supports that resources are limited and protecting minors is no longer as important as they implied. I feel that the most important thing here is protection of minors as they come as the first priority. We feel that resources can be rechanneled into actually enforcing this law of getting our age of consent and 18, as it actually protects the teenagers more, as they are the star of this talk. They are not an actual a side effect of the entire talk. They are the star of this talk, and they should be regarded as such. They also support the idea of autonomy, and I feel that this goes against the whole idea of a minor, because a minor is someone that cannot fully stand on their own. They depend fully on their parent. So a minor cannot decide on their own what they have to do. So the idea of autonomy holds no water in this debate. Also, to emphasize on our case as side government, we feel that it is more important that our laws are consistent. We see that the age of marriage in Zimbabwe is 18. So we cannot have a lower age of sexual consent. Since this goes against our laws, it actually conflicts against some of our laws. And according to our societal norms, some parents actually opposed to the idea of their children having sex and actually having pregnancy at an early age. And we feel that at this point, the parents may force their children to get married at a young age, and this will destroy the entire future of not only their children or those children, but the children that they will get. And we feel that this is more important than what side opposition has to offer. We also have to look at decline. We also have to look at mental and emotional readiness. Generally, and it is scientifically proven that minors are not mentally mature enough to handle sex and to handle the consequences of sexual activity. And we feel that this is more important that we protect their psychological and psychosocial balance than to actually support maybe sexual exploration, which we feel is less important than their safety or their sanity. We feel also that it is more important that we have a higher age of sexual consent, since lowering it will send a very wrong signal and a very dangerous signal to sexual predators. We feel that if we lower it, it means that sexual predators will view children as they are sexually available and sexually ready, and it will lead to these child marriages, and also lead to a lot of other dangerous and destructive practices that sexual predators have on children. And we feel that it's more important for us to protect our children, which is the stance that we're standing with as side government. The children are the star, and we stand by the full protection of the student. With this, I raise my case.
That was the Deputy Prime Minister. At this point, I would like to remind all participants that you are indeed mandated to take at least 1 point of information. Moving on to the next speaker, Deputy Leader of Opposition, the floor is yours.
Currently, many teenagers who are responsible and mature are having sex because they're in intimate relationships. Just because a few 16-year-olds get into accidents doesn't mean we should ban the license of all 16-year-olds. Opening government fails to show us the severity of the cases, which means that you should use that to infringe upon the autonomy and sexual rights, freedom and liberty of every other teenager who's having consensual, mature and safe sex because they've had a comprehensive package in sexual and reproductive health. They also say, look, there are issues to do with child marriages. If child marriage exists in a society where the age of consent is 16, raising it to 18 is not going to solve the problem. The problem is that communities are not being engaged in a holistic approach or in a holistic way because they don't care about the law. So we tell you in our framework that we need to strengthen policies of community engagement because you can't go to the same community that failed to engage with 16 and tell them, oh, the age of consent is now 18, therefore you can't have child marriages. It doesn't work, but you still don't engage with the problem. The reason there's child marriages or child trafficking and exploitation of children is because of the mindset. If a girl child is in a community where she doesn't have food and the family is struggling, they're going to sell that child whether or not the age of consent is 16, 18 or 21. You're using resources to create a policy framework on paper which has no real bearing on the ground instead of diverting attention towards community development projects that prevent the young girl child from being vulnerable. Educate the girl child, provide opportunities for employment, sustainable development of her community so that she doesn't have to be a victim of child marriages to be sold off so that her family can be rich. By increasing the age of consent, you create a pseudo assumption that we've solved the problem of child marriages. No, we have not solved the problem. We've assumed we've solved the problem, but diverted attention. Panel, it's important to note that these two strategies are not inexclusive. They are mutually exclusive because once you focus on one, the other deteriorates. They also talk about parents and say parents are not comfortable. Panel, we say engage with the parents. Parents should be able to teach their children. But if we don't engage with the parents will then become reliant on the idea of the age of consent protecting their children. Yes.
Can you comment on the fact that parents have been engaged, and the moment you start, when a 16-year-old brings a condom back home from school, that is going to start a war with the school?
It starts a war because parents haven't been engaged in a comprehensive way, and we want that to happen through religious institutions, through educational institutions, through programs like Say What that are spreading sexual and reproductive health. Once you do that, the parent has more control over the child. You say you guys are reliant on the parents or on other systems to protect children from sexual reproductive health. Panel, when a girl child is in a family environment and she's been raped by her uncle and the family prevents her from telling because they don't want to be shamed, the legal system or the age of consent is not going to intervene with that specific situation. You need organizations to talk to families and communities and say, family, this is how you deal with this problem from a legal standpoint. Yes.
How do we engage the uncle that has raped the child in question?
You engage the family of the uncle that has raped the child. You enlighten them to things like sexual harassment policies and what that means. You look at sustainable development policies so that the daughter is not dependent on the uncle. Because what daughter will take her uncle to prison when that's the same uncle she depends on for bread at home, for her school fees money? Or that student who depends on the lecturer for marks, who's being harassed in high school or in university because she has to pass to get a job to fend for herself because she's a vulnerable group. Panel, the problem is that girls are vulnerable. That is why they are being exploited. They are being protected by people close to them. You don't solve that problem by implementing a policy that strains resources but doesn't divert attention to the actual causes of the problem. We're saying take that attention, enforce and strengthen policies that deal with child harassment, that deal with child trafficking, increase the punishment for people who are responsible for abusing, harassing these children. That's how you solve the problem, not on an individual level, but on a community level. That is a more holistic approach that deals with the cause, not just the symptoms and the consequences. And this is why we win from opening opposition. Thank you.
That was indeed the Deputy Leader of Opposition making his case. At this point, we will be taking a short break. Stay tuned and we'll be back with more. Welcome back to the 6th edition of the SASI Debate Challenge. Yes, that is the Speak and Solve initiative brought to you by Say What with support from the Swedish Embassy in Zimbabwe. We are now at the half mark of our debate, and the topic reads: this House supports the decision to raise the age of sexual consent. I will repeat: this House supports the decision to raise the age of sexual consent. We will now hear from the closing government. Member of Government, the floor is yours.
Panel, so me and my friends, when we were talking about when we had our best sexual experiences, like most of us had the best sexual experience when we were like 20, and we had the most traumatic when we were like 16 or 14. And why do we think that is very important to today's debate? Because we don't think sex is about yes or no or consent. Sex has a lot of issues. We think sex is about, am I comfortable in doing this? Is there communication in doing this? And do I mutually enjoy that particular sex? We think that at the ages of 14, you do not know what exactly you want. You do not know which exactly sexual position is oppressive towards you as a young girl. We think that we ought to particularly value that knowledge that exists in society, and we equip these individuals that come into this debate, right? Firstly, in terms of extension, we have to characterize why 14-year-olds are not the right actors to be having sex, right? We think that you're just like 15 seconds past puberty and your body has changed. You want to experiment, and Mother Nature has just given you your first dose of libido, and you're just literally high, which means you're gonna make the bad decisions that are gonna gonna like create sexual trauma and affect the next person that you're gonna date in the next 5 years. We don't value a world with baggage such as social trauma. We value a world where individuals like have safe sex, but also have enjoy sex and also communicate and also set boundaries. Within that, at 16, you can't particularly set that particular boundary, right? 3 arguments that are particularly gonna get into a case, and those arguments are gonna engage the whole analysis that we get into today's debate, right? First of all, we think that when you illegalize something, you disarm societal monopolies. We think that the reason why we have child marriages existing in churches is because people are captured by that particular religion. There is no way in any world, if you engage them, that they're going to be willing to change. We think that patriarchy is not far. We don't fight patriarchy using like conversations. Patriarchy and men are not going to change because you particularly engage them. You create laws to make sure that women and young girls are protected in that particular status quo, which is why we value the evolution of laws to change and address societal problems that exist. We get no utility in all these comparatives that we exclusively get in today's debate, right? Secondly, we don't also value particularly the decrease of that age, because you further when you decrease the age of consent, you incentivize the creation of safe havens for abusers. We think that the sex market of the world is very toxic, even for an adult to navigate it. It's full of people that are pedophiles. It's full of people that love BDSM. It's full of people that love orgies and all those bad things that an individual as an adult doesn't particularly love, right? But for a young girl that is only just 14, she can't exactly like say, oh, I want to be involved in an orgy particularly, right? We think that the information that they receive is generally from the internet, which is pornography and not a true reflection of sex. We think that sex ought to be particularly be firstly experienced by 2 individuals who understand each other and communicate, and a 14-year-old has no general capacity to particularly enjoy that in that particular way, right? Thirdly, we think that we value the delay of healthy sexual relationship. We value delay because it promotes healthy and sexual development, right? We think that young people at 14 or young people at 13, they think that the most important thing in life is having sex. We think that sex is good, yes, but life is generally bigger than your sexuality or bigger than what you enjoy during sex. We particularly have to give them knowledge and show how there are so many things that they ought to buy into society, and they have that particular knowledge. That young people, Mr. Speaker, have nothing to bring to the table except their bodies, right? That's why you create old people who come to young people and realize that particular opportunity that exists and abuse them, right? A lot of people, Mr. Speaker, in society were raped at the age of 14 or abused at the age of 14, and the best or the worst sexual experiences at the age of 14, that they carried over and affected their general behavior, sexual behavior, such that it becomes a burden to their parties. What do we exclusively give into this debate, and what you ought to value? Disarming social monopolies and also creating a healthy social environment.
That was the member of government saying men will never change. We're moving on swiftly to the member of opposition. Member of opposition, the floor is yours.
Panel, this debate is not about whether or not child rights are good or are bad, whether or not government has the liability and responsible to uphold children's rights. We all value children's rights. We're not bad people like that. We all want children's rights to be protected. The contentions in this debate about what is the best way to uphold children's rights and whether or not this method is effective. We have a government running from opening government up to closing government that tells us that, well, there's no CSE in high school, so let's go to universities where we get CSE. Please don't have sex in high school because we don't have CSE. We think that this is a government that is trying to run away from their responsibilities. The responsibility of the government is to provide CSE and SRHR from the bare basic level. We think that if my biology teacher in Form 1 tells me that you have a vagina, you can have sex, I have the right to know what that means. And government is not fulfilling their role. And we are tired of this failing government that puts a beware of portals, I hate sign, that they are bringing it up into sexual matters even. We think that those are not the contentions in this debate. We also have a closing government and an opening government that says we value delay because it promotes safety and talks about how sex is generally toxic even for adults in Zimbabwe. Yes, sex is toxic even for you because there is no SRHR, and delaying or raising the age of consent does not solve or address that problem. The problem is that you don't know what positions are safe, you don't know what brutal or hardcore sex does to you, and scarring tissues and other things like that. And we think that provision of that information makes you an informed and mutually consenting individual, and that is something that we value. We also don't get anything from all the government pages, not now, Denzel, about what is the significant difference between a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old. So much for them to say lock your vagina until we're 18. We don't think that we get enough engagement on that. But anyway, I'll tell you that if a 16-year-old is allowed to drive, a 16-year-old is allowed to drive in Zimbabwe because they have access to information about driving. There are road and traffic safety rules. The driving handbook is not a scarce dated thing that is exclusive to parents. You don't say, oh mama, can I learn about driving? But you go to a driving school and you learn and you can drive and you can have 7 other people, everyone in this room, in the car, and you're perfectly fine with their lives in your hands. But when it comes to your own life and your own bodily autonomy, we have a government that says that no, you do not have the right to preside over that. We think that that is a flawed government, right? So what are the contentions in this debate and who are we fighting for? And why is the state liable? Those are things that are not even contentious. We think that we best achieve upholding children's rights and CSE and comprehensive sexuality education when we actually provide it, when we fulfill our mandate as a government. We tell you how the Public Health Act chapter 35 says that you can't access any basic health without the consent of your parent or a guardian. And this is even outside SRHR, which shows the problem that we have with our government. If I'm 16-year-old and have a headache, I can't go to Mpilo and say, please treat me without me providing my parent. And we think that these things extend to other faculties of our government. We think that this raising of age of consent from 16 to 18 is also problematic because nothing else has been done to ensure that it is effective. We tell you how with the patriotic bill, you know what happens if you violate it, but with raising the age of consent, that is the full stop. If you go to a court of law, you're still charged for having sex with a minor, which already exists in the status quo. So why is this exclusive, and why should we refuse sexual liberty rights for young people, right? We also tell you how the real problem is predators who get 2 years for raping 2-year-old Rudo. The real problem is people who are allowed to do all these things. And we think that harshening punishment for those people and playing our role as government is what is important. It was is going to prevent Uncle Joe that they're talking about from raping me in the first place. Because Uncle Joe can still rape me and go to court and go to prison for having sex with a minor, which is not even harsh. We also tell you we also tell you about how banning doesn't mean that people stop having sex. In fact, the harms are worse on that side of the debate. And we don't think that government cares about children and their rights. And we think that because of that, closing opposition deserves a chance.
With Uncle Joe having been entered into the chat, we will now be taking a short break. Stay tuned, and we'll be back with more. Welcome back to the 6th edition of the SASI Debate Challenge. Yes, that is the Speak and Solve initiative brought to you by Say What with support from the Swedish Embassy in Zimbabwe. We are in the last quarter of the second round of the semi-finals. I will be calling up onto the podium the government whip to give us his closing remarks.
Panel, we think that the reason why Uncle John, who rapes Rudo, only gets 2 years in prison is because Rudo is only 16 years old, she's vulnerable, she's easy to manipulate, and at the point at which the court needs to prove whether or not she consented to having sex with Uncle John, it becomes difficult because she has no level of understanding of how to stand her ground, first of all. Secondly, she's not mature enough, she's not socially intelligent enough to stand her case and argue and prove extensively that consent is something that she gave or consent is something that she did not give. Secondly, closing opposition's large argumentation stands on how best to uphold children's rights and how best to ensure that they're empowered enough to get to a point where they can be safe and to get to a point where they can protect themselves with regards to sexual activities that they encounter. Panel will tell you that by raising the age of consent from 16 to 18, we're not necessarily saying that sexual education is something that's eliminated for people that are below the ages of 18. We're saying that we need to give them more time to take in this information, understand it, and be able to apply it in their daily sexual activities in the event that they decide to indulge. And then opening opposition, what we get from the first speaker is firstly how there's difference in the levels of maturity. Panel will tell you that by virtue of 1% of 5-year-olds being able to read or write doesn't necessarily mean that we then need to change the entire curriculum to accommodate that 1% when we have a 99% of individuals that are not yet mature or at a point where they can safely engage in sex and protect themselves and stand their ground. Secondly, they talk about how mindset versus law and how mindset always wins over law. We tell that that's something that's not true. A law is binding and law comes with consequences. Whether or not you believe in something, by virtue of the law saying this is wrong, we feel like that's something that supersedes everything and stands. And secondly, their point of contention was again on empowerment versus restriction. We kind of feel like we're not necessarily restricting these individuals, we're only delaying them. And in that delay, we give them more time to be fully equipped. Firstly, secondly, we give them more time to be empowered, to be able to say, these are my boundaries, because we believe that sex is not only about the consent, but we also need to ask ourselves about what then happens after you've consented to having sex. There's the boundaries that you need to be able to set for yourself as an individual. There's decisions that need to be made in terms of this is what I like, this is what I don't like. And we kind of feel like those are the type of decisions that you're not able to make at the age that is below 18 because you're not an adult. And secondly, the reason why a 16-year-old becomes more vulnerable after having contracted an STI, they become more vulnerable after having fallen pregnant, after having sex before they're 18, is because the rest of the law and the rest of the institutions that are meant to support you or build you up as an individual in the rest of the country are not necessarily accommodative, and there are no provisions in place for you to get all the support that you may need. For example, someone who's below the age of 18 cannot be employed. So if you fall pregnant at the age of 16, you become more vulnerable because you are not in a position to be able to support yourself economically. And secondly, because you're below the age of 18, you cannot get the help that you would need from a health facility because you are below the age of 18. And what do you bring to you in this house? First of all, we say it's important for us to understand the impact that a law has and the direction in which it would take a society if a particular law is implemented, right? We feel like if a law says anyone below the age of 18 has the legal right to consent to sex, we feel like we weaponize and we enable our predators to exploit and continue to do those horrible things such as trafficking. We like the opposition argues on how sexual exploitation still exists, but we feel like the moment we reduce the age of consent and give young people the legal right to sort of consent to something, we empower them and increase the pool of kids that are at risk of being exploited, that are at risk of being trafficked at the end of the day. And we tell you that by virtue of people below the age of 16 having sex doesn't necessarily mean that we need to reduce the age of consent or whatever. We need to try our best efforts as a government to continue to protect people, to continue to make sure that people do not do things that they're not supposed to doing at the ages that they are. Thank you.
Government whip making her case. Last speaker of this debate, closing opposition whip. The floor is yours.
Panel, we get opening government and closing government that are avoiding reality. How will raising the age of consent stop young people from having sex? Right? The debate is not about 14-year-olds the debate is not about 14-year-olds, but the debate is about keeping the age of consent where it is currently, so as to protect the human rights that you're championing, right? We're talking about the government failure to provide SRHR, and this has led to the high HIV incidences in young women and young girls, right? You talk about closing government that speaks about patriarchy and how patriarchal societies have led to the problems that we have so far when it comes to keeping the age of consent, right? Talking about patriarchy, we have to dismantle that patriarchy, and this is supposed to be done by the government through education systems that are trickled down even to community levels to try and protect those people, decline Denzel, to try and protect those people from community levels, even in the rural areas, not really focusing only on the urban youth, but also focusing on the rural youth, as they constitute a large number of youths in Zimbabwe. Right. So what we are saying is raising age of consent as the closing opposition is another hyper-conservative decision which will be sold as protecting girls when in reality it really just criminalizes sexual expression of young consenting people because of what OG said when it said a sex of any kind. Yes, Denzel.
Prove that their consent is highly informed in the side of the house.
You want me to prove their consent is highly informed? Yes, it is, because they know what they're doing. Thank you. For consenting young people and promotes purity culture, a flagship of toxic patriarchy, which needs to be, which we regret, right? The assumption that people aren't having sex does not mean that equals unregulated, uninformed, unsafe sex practices, which are harmful and worse to these young people, right? The 16 and 17-year-olds that we are talking about won't stop being horny and already because the government that isn't even supposed to regulate other reactions in consent of 16-year-olds is decided by old people that sit in parliament and have decisions over the autonomy of other people, right? The government hasn't proven how they provide tangible safety and health rights on their side. They have overimposed and tried to avoid paternity of their job. Will not pardon or give a space to a failing government to do your job. Improve health policy, improve SRHR policy, improve and amend the Public Health Act to try and accommodate young people so that they go and access some of the services at health facilities without the need for going with parents. Right? What we are saying as closing opposition is there is no need to be infringing on the autonomy, and this limits the ability of these people to make informed decisions. If you are not giving them information, it means that they are going to go around and do the wrong information and self-educate as young people, right? We regret the purity culture and toxic patriarchy notions that have been expressed by the opening government and the closing government. And when the opening government said sex should only be reserved for marriage, fine. Because there are implications on raising the age of consent, because it won't even solve some of the problems, right? There's also a dangerous assumption from government that if you let the age of consent sit at 16, there are bad things that will happen. Bad things do happen, but only in a state where SRHR and CSE are foreign and sex offenders roam free and get light sentences and even presidential pardons. So what we stand by is the virtues do exist even at 16, right? My partner mentioned the fact that even at 16, people are allowed to have driving licenses. So that means they can make informed decisions. Thank you.
That was the last speaker of our debate, the closing opposition whip. As we wait for the adjudicators to deliberate, I just have to ask, what made people look so dapper today? Podium 1, how are you feeling about the semi-finals?
Well, this was the toughest one so far, but it was interesting actually.
Was interesting?
Yeah, it was.
What about it was interesting?
Well, there are a lot of things that were raised that we weren't anticipating, but it was like addressed nonetheless. So it's still good.
It's still good.
Yeah.
Podium 2, how are you feeling?
We feel better, but I agree with what Podium 1 said. It was really one of the toughest rounds so far.
With the participants feeling the heat, I am being told that the results are in.
Good day, debaters, and everybody who's here to support the debaters. As adjudication panel, as we're about to announce the teams making it to the final, and the teams that have not made it past the semi-finals, we would like to firstly thank all the sponsors of this show. Would like to thank the Swedish Embassy in Zimbabwe. Would like to thank Say What for giving us opportunity to mainstream debate as a weapon and as a tool to educate young people to be more critical about the world around them and to generate a critical interest in engaging in conversations that affect them and affect those around them and their communities. So with that being said, I would like to thank all the 8 teams for making it so far and also congratulate them because you are making it so far on the backs of other teams who have worked very hard, who have also given it their all to be here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call one by one teams that can excuse themselves from the stage. So drum roll, please. The first team that also, both debates were very contentious. The first team that we as an adjudication panel would like to exclude themselves from the stage would be Great Zimbabwe University.
Didn't make it.
The second team we would also like to exclude themselves from the stage would be the University of Zimbabwe. It gets trickier. The third team we would like to exclude themselves from the stage, from this semi-final call and announcement of motions would be the Midlands State University. Welcome back, and we are now down to our final 5 universities. The last team from these 5 teams to be eliminated from the stage. Drum roll, please. From the Chinhoyi University of Technology.
That's necessary. The camera, no.
So, first of all, as adjudication panel, would like you as the debaters in the universities to know that we took a lot of time in terms of debating amongst ourselves on what we considered the right call. We had a lot of very contentious debates where we ended up coming to agreements on what those calls were. So would like also on behalf of the tournament to thank you for your, to congratulate you on making it so far in the tournament, and to also thank you so much for making this tournament as competitive as it has been. With that being said, to the audience at home, the last 4 teams joining us here today in this semi-final break announcement are teams that did not manage to make it to the final. Round of applause for them. So with that being said, thank you very much. Congratulations on making it so far. We're also proud of the effort that you've put in this tournament, and without you, the tournament would not have been as competitive as it has been.
See you next year, guys. Thank you so much. It's been lovely. See you next year. Bye-bye. 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 Bye-bye.
Wait, you are what?
We're calling 577. We're calling 577. No, Tembani, no.
Above me in a room where all was obliterated.
What's her name?
The third team is
Tari Beg.
the final team is Are all the teams represented?
Yes.
Which schools do we have? Do we have Boa? You were excused from the room. The teams that were excused. The teams that are no, those are the teams I'm looking for.
Use it.
Actually, it's the other way around.
Use it, cut. Use it, cut. Uwa. And the other one.
Yes, MSC left the room.
And
MSC left the room.
LSU left the room.
Left the room. Yes.
We left the
room.
And
where's the other team? You also went there with this guy. Okay. So what's up your numbers?
Why are we picking numbers for excuse?
Alright, hey, come back. I need to know before you go.
Which side are you?
Alright. Come tell me your results. Yes, you are. CO from GZU.
CG from Cut.
Really make it to the final. 3G. This is crazy.
The way they say it, can these teams go out? And they didn't reverse this time. You know, like how they say these teams that are remaining are the ones that are proceeding. This time the teams that are proceeding, they say they should go out. So the teams that people went out were actually said
They thought maybe they didn't make it.
And people that were in started preparing. And then, no.
I think maybe that's a way of trying to create a vibe. That uncertainty around the game. That's creative.
That's what you thought that was going to happen.
That is already pure mode switch. You have switched between two modes or something like that. No.
That is it of the 6th edition of the SASI Debate Challenge. I am your debate mistress, Nicole. Until next time.